Hi there. If you don't know me, I'm a no-till home gardener in western Missouri, Zone 6B. I started out with you could make pottery out of it, clay soil, and some serious compaction, and one of the ways I've improved my soil is through the use of cover crops. Here's a reminder of the four principles of soil health from the Soil Health Institute. One reason cover crops are important is because they help us keep living roots in the soil as much as possible. When we finish harvesting a particular vegetable and it's too early to plant another vegetable in its place, we can plant a cover crop to keep living roots in the soil. Cover crops also help us meet that fourth principle of keeping the soil covered at all times, which prevents erosion and keeps soil cooler in the heat of summer, which microbes appreciate. If you're not familiar with it already, SARE has an excellent guide on cover crops that you can download for free at sare.org. Today, I want to talk about one of my preferred cover crops, cowpeas. Cowpeas can be good for smothering weeds, which is great, but even better is that they're nitrogen fixing, which basically means that they take nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form usable by plants. In other words, free fertilizer. You can see the nodules here on this cowpea root. It's recommended to inoculate cowpeas, but I didn't inoculate these, so they didn't fix as much nitrogen as they would have if inoculated. One of the things I like the most about cowpeas is their tolerance for heat and drought. Cowpeas go to town when it's at its hottest. The hotter it gets, the better they do. Let me tell you, when the lawn and blackberry vines are brown and tomato plants stop setting fruit and some flowers stop blooming because of the heat, it's nice to look out in the garden and see those cowpeas living their best life. SARE's cover crop guide says they can send a taproot down 8 feet to get moisture deep in the soil. The viney types are better suited for cover crops. Here's an example of one I pulled out of the soil to show how long the viney types are. This one was 12 feet long, and then the roots were an additional 3.5 feet. This is to show you how the viney types of cowpeas will sneak out of their planting area. I sometimes have strings outlining my permanent beds, and you can see here how this is climbed outside of the bed and is in the pathway. If it's not a pathway I need to walk down, I just let them go to town. If these escapees are going to get in my way, I cut them off. Cowpeas can come in pretty handy because you can just go trim them anytime you're needing green waste for composting. If you're in an area where soybeans are grown like me, when farmers are out planting soybeans, it's time to plant cowpeas. Soil needs to be 65 degrees for cowpeas as they will rot in cool soil. In western Missouri in Zone 6B, I usually plant them late May or early June. According to SARE, they can be planted as late as 9 weeks before the last frost. So, in terms of timing, cowpeas are a great crop to put in after spring vegetables, after spring oats or winter wheat if you're doing successive cover crops to get your soil in shape, or after vegetables like onions or potatoes that you harvest fairly early in the summer. How much seed you put out is dependent on what your goal is. If you don't need them to cover a bed quickly and are using a vining variety, and if you're really sure of yourself and your seed, you can be conservative and get away with planting a seed every 12 inches. I don't have any experience planting them later in the summer as Sarah says you can, but if I did, I would see them heavier than I do in May or June since the plants wouldn't have the chance to get as large. If you're going for quick coverage or a lot of biomass or planting them for the first time, I would use the typical seeding rates. I created this cheat sheet that shows the typical seeding rates for cover crops, which are usually given in terms of acres. Since home gardeners are growing cover crops on a much smaller scale, this breaks it down into smaller amounts. It starts with 30 pounds per acre, which translates into about a pound for a garden 37 feet long and 37 feet wide. Then 90 pounds per acre, which would be a little under 3 pounds for a garden 37 feet by 37 feet. And then 100 pounds per acre, which would be a little over 3 pounds for a garden 37 feet by 37 feet. You would need to break it down into even smaller numbers for a smaller garden, or if you just want to put a cover crop in a bed or two. My beds are 20 feet long and 2.5 to 3 feet wide, and for me, a pound of cover crop seed is typically enough for anywhere from 4 to 9 beds, depending on what type of seed it is. So a little of cover crop seed goes a long way for a home gardener. Half a pound or a pound will probably be all that you'll need, and then that may last you a few years. This one is specific to cowpea seeding rates, and at the bottom it includes dimensions of common sizes of raised beds or permanent beds to give you a sense of how little seed you'll need for just a bed or two. Because cowpea seeds should be planted 1 to 1.5 inches deep, broadcasting isn't usually recommended for them. If you do broadcast, you'll want to use more seed than if you make a furrow, as some of the seed isn't going to get deep enough and won't germinate. With the furrow method, you'd want half a pound for a garden 26 feet by 26 feet, a quarter pound for a garden 18 feet by 18 feet, and so on. Because my soil was in such bad shape when I started out, one of the things I love about cowpeas is that they can grow in less than ideal soil and help with compaction. This is just a baby plant that I had to pull out early, so it's just a foot tall or so, but its roots were 2.5 feet. Besides growing in poor soil, cowpeas can grow in unfinished compost, which is handy for me since I do a lot of sheet composting. When I start a new permanent bed, I typically cover the grass with a layer of leaves and then do a few green and brown layers made up of whatever I have around. The following spring, the soil underneath it is typically in pretty bad shape since I've got heavy clay with a lot of compaction here, and what's on top may not be fully composted. I can just rake up what's on top, throw down some cowpea seed, and cover up the seed with what I had raked up. If you look close, you can see that what these young cowpeas are growing in is pretty mulchy looking. Another reason I like cowpeas is that they're easy to terminate. Unless you want to save some seed, you'll want to terminate cowpeas when they are flowering and before they have seed pods. Since I'm gardening on a fairly small scale, I usually just get a pair of loppers and cut them off a little above the soil. To build healthy soil, you always want to leave plant roots in the ground, and that's especially true of cowpeas since they're nitrogen fixing. If I'm wanting to broad fork the bed and plant something, I'll pull the cowpea plants out and use them as a green layer where I'm sheet composting somewhere else in the garden. If I don't need to do something with that bed right then, I might leave the cowpea plant in the bed it was growing in and then put a brown layer on top. I bought a pound of iron and clay cowpeas from Seed Ranch for $10 a few years ago. I'm not a big fan of that company in general, but their cowpeas have done well. There's some interesting history on iron and clay cowpeas on Southern Exposure Seed Exchange's website. Brought to the U.S. by enslaved Africans before the American Revolution, clay peas were carried as rations by Confederate soldiers, while both iron and clay cowpeas sustained newly freed African Americans after the Civil War, according to George Washington Carver's 1908 cookbook of field pea recipes. If you use dried beans in the kitchen, one thing to consider is choosing a variety that's particularly good for eating. You may never have to buy a dried bean again and get healthy soil as an added bonus. One thing you should know about cowpeas is that aphids really like them. If you grow cowpeas, you will likely at least once get to witness the weird phenomenon of ants farming aphids. They basically treat aphids like livestock. Aphids secrete a sugary substance that ants love. They will actually stroke aphids with their antennae, stimulating them to release honeydew, similar to a human milking a cow. To keep aphids from flying away, ants will even bite their wings off. Isn't that fascinating and creepy? If you see aphids on your cowpeas, one of the easiest ways to deal with them is to just blast them with a hose. Aphids dislodged by a hose usually aren't able to get back up on the plant again. The other way to deal with aphids: attract beneficial insects to your garden with herbs and flowers, and don't use insecticides. A lot of insecticides, even the more natural kinds, kill good bugs along with the bad. Cowpeas do attract beneficial insects themselves, but I include as many herbs and flowers in my garden as I have space for to attract as many beneficial insects as possible. Who exactly do you want to attract to deal with aphids? Ladybugs, parasitic wasps, and lacewings. Ladybugs eat anywhere from 25 to 50 aphids per day. Note here what their larvae look like. One day I went out in my garden and saw these larvae everywhere and freaked out, thinking I had an infestation of some horrible insect that was going to eat all my stuff. Anytime I see an insect I don't recognize, I Google it with a basic description to find out if it's beneficial or not. Luckily, Google didn't fail me, and I learned that the weird little gray things all over my garden were ladybug larvae. Parasitic wasps lay an egg inside the aphid's body, which hatches into a larva that consumes the aphid's internal parts. The aphid dies and looks like a mummy, and then an adult wasp eventually emerges through a small exit hole it chews through the aphid's skin. Also fascinating. Lacewings are another predator of aphids. I saw a lot of different estimates for how many aphids they'll eat on different extension websites. We'll go with the more conservative estimate of eating 200 aphids per week. To attract the beneficial insects that will go after aphids, plant cilantro, dill, sweet alyssum, buckwheat, echinacea, coreopsis, cosmos, sunflowers, fava beans, or phacelia. Fava beans, phacelia, buckwheat, and sunflowers are used as cover crops themselves. As you can see in the seed description, besides attracting beneficial insects, fava beans have large, deep roots that break up heavy clay and compacted soil. They also fix nitrogen. I tried Phacelia last year. A lot of it didn't come up, but I think I didn't plant it at the ideal time. I saved the seed and won't be trying it again this year. Phacelia is great for pollinators too, as it blooms earlier than a lot of other flowers. So, besides attracting beneficial insects that will go after your aphids, it will help bees get through the spring while they're waiting for summer flowers to bloom. A lot of the herbs and flowers I mentioned to attract beneficial insects are self seeders, so they don't return year after year from their roots like perennials do, but they will often return year after year from the seed they've dropped. So, what you might consider is dedicating one bed or even a couple beds in your garden to these self seeders and allow them to come back in the same spot year after year. Diversity is always best, so throw a couple different types of seeds in the same bed if you want. Maybe some dill, cilantro, and phacelia in one bed. So often we keep our flowers in one area and our vegetables in another and put an herb garden in yet another spot. But I've integrated flowers and herbs into my vegetable garden and I'm loving it. Besides how beautiful the garden looks with all that additional color, the increase in beneficial insects has been noticeable. If you go to the trouble of attracting beneficial insects, instead of getting your garden clean and tidy in the fall, leave as much plant debris in the garden as you can to provide nesting and overwintering habitat for beneficial insects. Insects will hibernate in or lay eggs in the debris from your garden, and those eggs will hatch and mature before aphids and pests do. I do a lot of mulching with leaves. Leaf litter is a great habitat for beneficial insects. Okay, you feel ready to grow cowpeas now, right? I hope so. This is the first of many videos on cover crops I found helpful in the home garden. I'd love to hear about everyone else's favorite cover crops or what your experience has been with cowpeas in the comment section. Using the comment section, liking videos, and subscribing is a great way to help my channel reach more people.